For 6 long years, Rayo lived in the wilderness, far from the slums and the capital that had once defined his life. The forest became his home, its towering trees and winding rivers his only companions. Each day was a battle for survival, hunting for food, fending off monsters, and training relentlessly to refine his skills. Despite his efforts, Rayo found himself unable to progress beyond level 1 spells. No matter how much he practiced, the higher-level magic he had glimpsed during his time in the hero's party remained out of reach. Yet, Rayo refused to give up. He could feel himself growing stronger, even if his magic didn't reflect it. The monsters he fought, once formidable opponents, now fell more easily to his spells. His movements became sharper, his instincts more precise. He knew he was improving, even if the world around him couldn't see it. 2 years into his training, Rayo's routine was interrupted by an unexpected encounter. While hunting for food, he spotted a figure in the distance, a man dressed in black, his face obscured by a strange, cult-like hoodie. The man moved with an eerie grace, his presence sending a chill down Rayo's spine. Something about him felt wrong. Rayo hesitated. Part of him wanted to reach out, to see if the man needed help. But another part, the part that had learned to trust his instincts in the wilderness, screamed at him to stay away. The man radiated danger, and Rayo knew better than to ignore that feeling. Instead of approaching, Rayo decided to follow the man from a distance, keeping to the shadows. But the man was fast, too fast. Within moments, he had disappeared from Rayo's sight, leaving no trace of his presence. Rayo frowned, his unease growing. Who was this man, and what was he doing in the wilderness? Before Rayo could ponder further, a blood-curdling scream shattered the silence. The sound came from deeper in the forest, and without thinking, Rayo sprinted toward it. His heart pounded as he ran, his mind racing with possibilities. Was someone in danger? Had a monster attacked? When he arrived at the source of the scream, the scene before him made his blood run cold. A campsite, once bustling with life, was now a scene of carnage. Tents were torn apart, supplies scattered, and bodies lay strewn across the ground, their blood staining the earth. The air was thick with the metallic scent of death. Rayo's stomach churned as he approached cautiously, his eyes scanning for any signs of life. One of the victims, a man barely clinging to consciousness, spotted Rayo and reached out weakly. "Help me," he rasped, his voice barely audible. Rayo's instinct screamed at him to stay back, but he couldn't ignore the man's plea. He took a step forward, his heart pounding. But before he could reach the survivor, a sudden surge of heat made him freeze. He turned just in time to see a massive fireball hurtling toward him. There was no time to think. Rayo threw himself to the side, the fireball narrowly missing him. The explosion that followed sent him tumbling to the ground, debris raining down around him. When he looked up, the survivor was gone, consumed by the flames. Before Rayo could catch his breath, another fireball came hurtling toward him. This time, he was ready. He scrambled to his feet and fired his own fireball, a small but precise burst of flame. The two spells collided in midair, creating a shockwave that knocked Rayo off his feet and buried him under a pile of rubble. Pain shot through his body as he struggled to move, his vision blurring. Through the haze, he saw the man in black approaching, his expression unreadable. The man glanced around, seemingly satisfied that Rayo was no longer a threat, and then disappeared into the forest. Rayo's last thought before losing consciousness was a bitter one. "I thought I was getting stronger, but one high-level fireball was enough to take me out." Hours later, Rayo awoke, his body heavy with pain and his vision blurred. The faint sound of growling reached his ears, pulling him back to consciousness. He blinked slowly, trying to clear his head, and then he heard it, a long, haunting howl in the distance. It was a wolf, its cry echoing through the forest like a signal. The sound sent a chill down Rayo's spine. The wolf had caught the scent of his blood, and it was calling for its pack. Rio's heart began to race. He knew what that meant. Wolves rarely hunted alone, and if the pack was coming, he was in no condition to fight them off. His body ached with every movement, his wounds still fresh from the explosion in the rubble that had buried him. He had to move, now. Panic surged through him as he forced himself to move, every muscle screaming in protest. He stumbled to his feet and began to run, the wolves hot on his heels. His mind raced as he tried to think of a way to escape. The forest was dense, but the wolves were faster. Then he saw it, a cliff, its edge looming ahead. Below, a river rushed through the valley. It was a desperate move, but Rayo had no other choice. With the wolves closing in, he took a deep breath and leapt off the cliff, plunging into the icy water below. The impact knocked the air from his lungs, and the current dragged him downstream. Rayo fought to stay afloat, his body battered and bruised. Eventually, the river carried him to shallow waters, where he managed to drag himself ashore. Exhausted and injured, he pushed himself to keep moving, knowing he had to reach safety before collapsing. Awakening the next day, Rayo understood his strength wasn't enough. He had to get stronger. The encounter with the man in black and the wolves had shaken him, but it had also ignited a fire within him. He couldn't afford to be weak, not in a world where danger lurked around every corner. A year after his encounter with the man in black, Rio's training took him deeper into the wilderness than ever before. The monsters here were stronger, more aggressive, and far more dangerous. But Rayo was no longer the boy who had fled the capital. He was stronger, faster, and more determined than ever. One day, while tracking a particularly elusive monster, Rayo stumbled upon something he had only heard about in stories, a dungeon. The entrance was hidden among the trees, its stone archway covered in moss and vines. As Rayo looked around, his mind drifted back to memories of his time in the hero's party. They had never been strong enough to enter a dungeon, and the thought of exploring one now filled him with both excitement and trepidation. The dungeon was newly formed, its presence unnoticed by the outside world. Rayo knew that dungeons were born in areas with a high concentration of unchecked monsters, and this one was no exception. The air around it was thick with mana, and the faint hum of dark magic sent a shiver down his spine. Rayo hesitated at the entrance, his instincts warning him of the dangers that lay within. But he had come too far to turn back now. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside, his heart pounding with anticipation. The first few floors were surprisingly easy. The monsters were weak, their attacks clumsy and uncoordinated. Rayo dispatched them with ease, his level 1 spells more than enough to handle the threats. But as he descended deeper into the dungeon, the atmosphere changed. The air grew heavier, the darkness more oppressive. And then, on the 5th floor, he found himself face to face with a subboss. The creature, a golem, was massive, its hulking form towering over Rayo. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and its hands gleamed like steel. Rio's heart sank as he realized the gravity of the situation. This was no ordinary monster, it was a force of nature, a being of pure destruction. Rayo quickly regretted his earlier confidence. The subboss roared, its voice shaking the very walls of the dungeon, and charged at him with terrifying speed. Rayo barely had time to react, his mind racing as he prepared for the fight of his life.